So we're going to jump right into actually building and creating a virtual machine without too much introduction, because it's easier to do it and become more familiar with the settings as you go along. For these purposes, we're going to be using Ubuntu by Kent. Wow. So we're just going to jump right into building and creating our own virtual machine using Ubuntu. We're going to be doing this process from scratch as well. The reason we're using Ubuntu, we're going to be using Ubuntu Desktop specifically, is because it's still going to have a GUI, it's going to have a user interface. It's still pretty easy to learn, but it's going to give us that malleability in terms of what we need to install as far as services go and different kinds of tasks that we want to do with it. So in order to get started, we're just on the Ubuntu website, ubuntu.com, or Ubuntu, depending on how you pronounce it. And then at download on the top, we're going to look for desktop version, and we're going to go for the LTS. If you want, you can go with 21.10. Just keep in mind that this is not going to be a long-term supported version, and you may run into usability issues and security patches that won't come later on down the line. So go ahead and click on 20.4 LTS, and then give a couple seconds for the download to actually start going. This is going to come down as an ISO file, and we're going to save this file to our desktop because we may need it more than once. So hit OK, and then do yourself a favor, go get a cup of coffee or something, because it's going to take a couple of minutes depending on your internet speed in order to download this file. And now that the download is just about finished or wrapping up, we're going to be moving on to the part where we actually create our virtual machine. As you'll see, I do have a few already created, but we're going to create a new one just from scratch for the purposes of this video. So to get started, we're going to go up to Machine and click on New, or in this case you can use Control-N or whatever shortcut is applicable to your computer. The name, we're just going to name it whatever is easiest for you to remember. We'll just call it VM for Hackers. The machine folder, I would recommend leaving it as default unless you want your machines to get somewhere else. As you may notice, I have this mounted under a completely different hard drive, and the reason for this is because I have a much larger hard drive on my machine that's secondary. And when you're dealing with virtual machines, the space can get pretty large, so it's just something to keep in mind. The type, we are not going to be using a Windows type machine, we're going to be using Linux, so switch that to Linux. And Oracle 64-bit, you can change that in this case to Ubuntu 64-bit. Click on Next. The memory size is going to be up to you, but what I would recommend is also referring to whatever manufacturer of the operating system has the recommended specs at. In this case, I know Ubuntu is minimum at 2 gigs, but I like to be a little bit more generous and we can change this up to 4. Just keep in mind that whatever resources you're sparing to your virtual machine will be taken from your host machine. So if you have 32 gigs of RAM, for example, and you spare 4 gigs to a guest, those 4 gigs will be allocated directly to your guest operating system as opposed to your host. So just something to keep in mind. We'll go ahead and hit Next. Hard disk, we can go ahead and create a virtual hard disk now. Just to get us started, you can choose VDI, click Next. Dynamically allocated will bump up the size of your hard drive in case you go over the limit, which is kind of nice. Fixed size will stay at a certain size, which may be a pain as your operating system starts to grow, if you're installing applications on it, and so on and so forth. But we're going to go with dynamically allocated for now, since we have the space. And then we can go ahead and choose our size. And for this, I'm going to go with 36 gigs. It's a bit of an odd number, but it's enough for what we need without being too much. And go ahead and hit Create. So instantaneously, you're going to see VM for Hackers added to your list, or whatever you named it as. And in this case, now we have to power it on. So before we do that, we want to make a couple of additional tweaks just to make our lives a little bit easier. So right-click on that virtual machine and go to Settings. And now under General, we're going to go to Advanced. Sharing clipboard, I prefer having bidirectional copy and paste. This way, if you're copying something from your host machine, you can paste it in your desk machine or your guest machine, or if you're working in your guest machine and you want to copy it to your host, it'll work. Vice versa, it'll be almost seamless. After that, we're going to go to System. We've already set our memory, which I'm okay with. The processor, however, is going to be set to 1 core. What's going to happen here is the more cores you add, the more virtual cores are going to be allocated to your machine. Again, this is going to be taken from your host machine. So if you have an 8-core processor, you may be allocating up to 2 or 4 or 6 cores, depending on how it goes. So in this case, I'm going to go with 2 processor cores. which will take 2 virtual cores from my host machine and allocate them to my guest machine. Under display, video memory, we're going to crank all the way up because this is a desktop version. If you were running just a headless server with no interface, you wouldn't really need this option, but it is something just to keep in mind. Now there are additional settings for storage, audio, and especially network, but networking we're going to come back to in a later video because there are different ways you can network your VirtualBox machines to either communicate with each other or not communicate with each other depending on the use case that you're going for. Now we can go ahead and hit OK. The settings are saved, and now what's left to do is actually double click on our machine to start it. So let's go ahead and fire up our virtual machine by double clicking on it. What you'll notice now is that you've been presented with a prompt that's going to ask you what operating system you want to choose as a startup disk. So imagine you've just built a brand new PC, an actual physical PC, and you turned it on for the first time, but there's no operating system. You're going to need to provide either a CD-ROM, a floppy disk if you're super old school, or some kind of USB drive in order to get an operating system booted into memory and run. In this case, that's exactly what we need to do here. So I already have operating systems that are already set up because I've done this before, but we're going to click on the small folder icons to actually choose an image. In the upper left-hand corner of this prompt, you're going to click Add to add a disk that you want to use. We're going to choose the image that we've already downloaded before. And now that we have our image highlighted, you can just click Choose, and now start the virtual machine. If everything goes correctly, your screen will go black and then quickly turn purple. The resolution is going to be pretty small, but this is a good time to let you know that your machine is actually starting. It's going to go through the normal process of checking the disk and checking the files for integrity, and then it'll start giving you installation prompts. We're going to close out this mouse integration pointer message because we won't need that for right now. Alright, and now we've been brought to the install screen. If you've installed Ubuntu before, you're free to go through these prompts, but if you haven't, follow along with me and I'm going to walk you through the steps. On the right hand side, we're going to choose Install Ubuntu. And we'll keep the keyboard layout the same. We'll go ahead and click Continue. I would recommend a normal installation, which will give you the entire installation experience, as well as downloading updates while installing Ubuntu, because this is going to give you up-to-date software as well as up-to-date security patches that you're going to need. So go ahead and click Continue in the lower right. You'll be asked what kind of installation type you want to go through with. If you want to erase the disk and install Ubuntu or something else, you can go into nitty-gritty features if you want to, but I don't think it's necessary for this install. So keep it as is and click Install Now. Click Continue to apply the changes. And then go ahead and choose your time zone. Now we can actually provide a name. And we're going to keep this really simple. My name is Hacker. Username is also going to be Hacker. This is going to be the computer name, Hacker VirtualBox, because it knows we're virtualizing here. And then pick a password. My password is intentionally weak, and I know that, but this machine is only going to be running when I'm near it anyway, so I'm okay with that for the time being. You can also set log me in automatically, which is a little bit easier, so that way when the machine starts, it's just going to bring you right to the desktop. So go ahead and hit Continue. So the installation itself will go through a couple of different phases of copying the files and actually installing them. In addition to that, it's going to be providing the updates. So in this case, it's a good time to step away, get a cup of coffee, get a snack or something, and come back in a few minutes to check on what's going on. And I'm going to let this run and speed it up just so you get the whole picture of what's happening. Now that the installation is complete, we can actually go ahead and just click on Reboot Now to just restart the machine. And you may also need to remove the installation medium, which in this case would be the CD-ROM we installed earlier and added to boot from. But in this case, you can just go ahead and hit enter, and the machine will boot just like a normal computer. Okay, and you'll see we've been brought to a desktop. If you want to add additional accounts, you can, but I don't recommend it. You can just hit skip and send this stuff over, and you're all set. Now, in order to make the most of your virtualization experience of the machine, I highly recommend, although this is optional, to install the guest add-ons. The guest add-ons are provided by Oracle or VirtualBox that include a couple of different features such as mouse pointer integration, better video driver support, which allows you to make the screen larger and smaller, as well as shared folders, which is interesting because you might want to have different use cases where you share folders between your host machine and your guest machine. So in order to do that, we can go up to Input. So in order to do that, we can go up to Devices and click on Insert Guest Add-ons CD image. And depending on whether or not you've already downloaded the guest add-ons, you may need to actually download it from Oracle, in which case you can follow the prompts in order to do so. Otherwise, it will be added to your virtual machine as a DVD or some kind of CD. In this case, my operating system recognized that I have an auto run in here, so we can go ahead and click Run. We'll just need to enter our password. And then we'll see in the background that the guest modules are being installed. We have it twice, so we can close the first one. And then when you have the prompt that says press return to close this window, you can go ahead and click enter, and then go ahead and reboot your system. Now that the operating system is back up and running again, we can actually go ahead and drag to increase the screen size, and you'll notice that the guest operating system will also change resolution in response to that. So you can make your windows as big or as small as you need to, and the guest will act accordingly. And with our newly set up machine, we can do anything we really want to, or anything with a normal desktop that we could. We can launch different applications, we can browse the web, we can install packages on it, and that's what we're going to do in a couple of future episodes. But we also want to sort out networking. Networking is going to determine the way we have our boxes communicate with each other, as well as how they communicate with the internet, and also on our local network, maybe at home or in our office or whatever you're deploying these machines to. So we're going to head and cover that in the next lecture.